It is hot in the UK right now, but what is even hotter is the TIMMS review released today. And Sir Stephen Timms, quite frankly, has done the disabled community well, because even he agrees that PIP in its current format is not fit for purpose. Hallelujah. So in this video, I'm going to go through the 10 main points, and then tomorrow I'm going to drop you another one depending on the comments that you leave on this video, going deeper into the detail. So let's get into it. Now, before I get started, I'm going to say what I find is the biggest disappointment in his recommendations before I start praising him for his other points that he's made. And that's that he doesn't recommend any immediate changes to PIP. Something inside of me says, somebody please make this make sense, because when we go into his points afterwards, you're going to want to think, why can he just not change something, or why can something just not be changed right now? And I know if you suffer with disabilities, chronic illness, fluctuating conditions, neurodivergence, you guys, there's a big point in this for you. You want to be sticking around. And if you struggle particularly making applications for PIP or any type of health assessment, you may want to get one of my two books here. This one is a health journal. It's specifically written to help you navigate the points in recording and evidencing your conditions. And this one is literally my little golden Bible. I'm going to leave the link down below, and if you want to get it, you can. So point number one is that he says that in its current format, the way it operates right now, that the whole PIP system is not fit for purpose. He says, and I think this is really quite interesting, it's overly complex. How can a system that is meant to support disabled people have been constructed so that it's overly complex? Surely the brains behind engineering this whole system should have thought, oh, maybe some people might have learning conditions or neurological conditions or cognitive conditions, or maybe they're just exhausted from the medicine and all the things they need to take. So why don't we just help them out and make it simple? By the way, Sir Stephen Timms, if you want a hand on any of this in implementing structures that are going to help disabled people, I am at your beck and call. Just get in my emails. Number two, he says it is inconsistent. Now, quite frankly, whether you're applying for PIP, access to work, or anything like that, sometimes when I've looked at these applications, I've thought, well, claimants are often between the devil and the deep blue sea. Inconsistency is the key word. Now, this goes down to inadequate training and not enough clear guidance on how to apply the regulations within the Department of Work and Pensions. I mean, I could write a whole book on that. The next part, he says, is that the current PIP system causes unnecessary stress. I don't think there's going to be a single person that applies for this that would actually not agree with that. And again, why has it been made so stressful? Is it really about saving the national debt, or is it about something else? Now, this next quote from his report is really, really important. And I say thank you, Stephen Timms, for actually putting this into your report, because this is so important. He says that currently when people are applying for PIP, reapplying, being assessed, having reassessments, or just navigating that entire system entirely, that they are left feeling ignored or dehumanized. Again, how can a system that is meant to help disabled people leave people feeling ignored and dehumanized? Is that not the purpose of this, to make sure that that doesn't happen? So respectfully, Sir Stephen Timms, I think you need to start making immediate changes. Okay, let's get on to point two. Point two looks at the assessment process, and this is heavily criticised. And again, anybody that's gone through this process knows that, quite frankly, when you're applying for PIP, you feel like you're being interviewed by MI5 for a crime that you just did not commit. Again, when did being disabled or needing help because of your health conditions make you a criminal? And when we put the bank statement sagas with that, I mean, it's getting too bad. His review stated that people have to repeatedly prove their disability. Again, if someone's been awarded something and they have lots of evidence, particularly diagnosis and medical evidence, why do they have to go through such a rigmarole? Is this not just a waste of taxpayers' money at this point? The next two sub-points here are my favourite. He says assessors often misunderstand fluctuating conditions. Again, as I said at the opening, this goes back to training. Why are assessors so incompetent? If you do not understand fluctuating conditions, why do you have a job assessing for them? I mean, I'm just saying it as it is. That's a point that definitely needs changing, and so does the next one. This is something I have a personal bugbear with because I have both a physical and a mental health condition, and quite often people who have mental health and or neurodivergence, if they attempt to do anything where they're using their brain or they are considered capable in any way, then their disability and how this part, their mental health or their neurodivergence affects them, is then used to question whether they have these conditions in the first place. That is just a whole actually Victorian rhetoric that just needs to go. I find it discriminative. Just because I have mental health conditions, just because I have a physical disability, it does not mean that I am mentally inept. And when you put those together, claimants feel that they are not believed. And when people do not feel believed, they do not trust. And the Department of Work and Pensions, quite frankly, because of its, ridiculous way that it approaches things, really has lost all trust, I think, of any member of the British public that has to use them. Now, since COVID, I have noticed a number of public authorities, council, all sorts of other authorities like that, doing what I call COVID clawback, where lots of the services that would have helped people who are more vulnerable because of health, for example, or disability, those services are just not available, or they're really difficult to get hold of, or the wait time for them, very much like PIP, is so long that people become almost destitute before they get the help that they need. Again, we're in 2026. Why is this still happening? I mean, spot the elephant in the room here. Now, this is a quote. Don't come for me on this one. One surprising being the key word, funnily enough, one surprising finding was that the system can discourage work. Well, you don't say. If you've ever tried to work, or you are indeed perhaps in employment and you've requested, like I did when I worked for the Department of Work and Pensions, reasonable adjustments, and then you realise you have to go through nearly a 5-year-long court case after they fire you, just because you requested something that actually you were entitled to all along because of your disabilities, but then they just want to dress it up into you not doing your job very well, or maybe it's just because of your character. Is it any wonder that disabled people do not want to work? Who's in the wrong there? Is it the system, or is it the employers that are just not accommodating disabled people, or is it both of those organisations? And when a country, I will say, or a system starts to operate, or does operate in that way, people become reluctant to try. They lose their confidence. They're scared of losing the financial dependency that they already have. So people genuinely become afraid of trying work. Now, once that sets in and you mix anxiety with that, then that can make somebody's health conditions even worse. So I say it is the fault of organisations like the Department of Work and Pensions, who have stigmatised disabled people for so long that we've got to this system here where their own systems are having to be independently reviewed and still found unfit for purpose. That is it any wonder that the system can, and I would say does, discourage work. And when you align that with the wages in this country that are so low, compared to the cost of living here and the rent and the food and the heating and the council tax and everything else, people question, I'm actually better off staying at home, not even going to get a salary. That is a problem for the government to solve. That is not a problem for disabled people to solve. Now, the part in his report or his review that I don't agree with is what I've just said to you, actually not being called out for what it is, but then blaming it on the disabled people and using this term, activity trap. It's not about activity. If people knew that they weren't going to be stigmatized, they were going to get the support at work, they were going to get the adjustments that they needed, and they weren't going to have to wait 2 years or go through a 5-year court case like I had to, and that they were going to be properly paid so that they could afford to not actually have to rely on benefits, I'm pretty sure their mental health would get better, their overall health would get better, their diet would get better because they would be able to eat better food. So their nutritional aspect, when let's face it, nutrition charges the body, would be so much better that everything would just improve. But when you expect people to live on next to nothing, and let's not forget that universal credit is about £320 a month, and you expect somebody to feed themselves on that, pay their rent and do everything else, is it any wonder that they don't feel like doing anything? Because they're not going to be eating any decent food for that amount of money that's going to nutritionally feed their body. This is very basic. This is very basic, and I'm having to point this out on a YouTube video for our government to kind of like get. Now, when somebody in government starts using words like they want bold and radical reform, I'm kind of like, I need to go back to Hobbletown and live remotely, because this is never ever a good idea. And for me, this is exactly the reason why. We're just left with a whole load of, sorry, but haven't these all been done before, long list of things. Redesigning assessments, simplifying evidence, improving trust, making decisions more consistent, reducing unnecessary reassessments, making the system more personalised. I'm sorry, but that's just a whole load of woolly codswallop, isn't it? That is literally nothing at all. That is not a bold and radical reform. That's a get out of doing anything really statement, card, whatever you want to call it. That is not going to change the PIP system. As I said, Mr. TIMMS, I'm at your service. Now this one, medical evidence may be given greater weight. I actually don't think this is a bad idea, as long as then they are maybe going to fast track or perhaps provide properly qualified NHS doctors or specialists to actually make sure that they can assess people. But because the NHS is in the state that it's in, because the government fired half of their doctors when Rishi Sunak was in power, what this is going to mean is that if they bring that in, disabled people are going to have to wait more time to have reassessments done. That's not fair. So that's not an improvement unless they want to rehire all the doctors that they fired. This comment here, there is recognition of fluctuating and invisible conditions where you don't say. Not all medical conditions are that obvious. And this, again, I just don't feel it's very conclusive. Many respondents said the current descriptors fail to reflect how these conditions affect day-to-day life. Now, because I have helped a lot of people with their PIP applications, and because my health journal in particular helps specifically with those descriptors and knowing what to write, because you're prompted in the health journal every single section, I would say that if somebody feels that the descriptors currently as they are fail to reflect their everyday conditions, I wouldn't necessarily say that's entirely true. I think there's improvement to be made on the descriptors, but I think what needs to happen is the descriptors need to be made a lot more simply, and when people are being assessed and they say, I struggle to do this, that's exactly what should be written down on the form, not paraphrased by an assessor. For example, I've had people in my comments before saying that they've had, they've had both of their legs are amputated and they've got 0 points for PIP. Like, that, quite respectfully, is just plain stupid. How can an assessor give somebody that has no legs 0 points? Because clearly it would be visually obvious that they would struggle to walk. Now, I would love to think that the review is not about announcing benefit cuts. I would love to think that that's the truth. However, the white paper and the green paper have clearly stated how much money the government calculate to save by taking people who have disabilities or health conditions off of LCWRA, for example, and putting them on LCW, which means they lose £420 a month, around about. And if you are on the new type of universal credit with the health element, it means that you're not going to get that. And if you don't get that in years to come, you're not going to be eligible for PIP, because I strongly suspect they're going to roll it all into one. So the review not being about decreasing benefit cuts or decreasing how much the government is spending on disability, I just don't think any of us can believe. However, if they want to provide anything they've ever said or done to contradict that, like, put it in the comments, please. Because here we have the point that follows it: introduce new eligibility rules. All of this is just like the Education Act. So obviously lots of you will know, years and years ago I used to be a teacher. I do not know, well, I actually do. The Education Act, our curriculum in the UK, has probably been changed more than any country, literally, and it's still not right. So why do they have to keep introducing new rules, doing this, doing that? It's not really solving the problem, is it? It's just moving the goalposts. Now, the report does say that any reforms must also be financially sustainable. But when you look at everything that I've just mentioned, it kind of contradicts itself. And I think this is the key of why PIP is such a failure, and why people feel so failed by the system, and why that report had to be done in the first place. So after all of that wait, after all of the TIMMS review report, after all of this tra-la-la-la-la-la, nothing changes. What a surprise. Nothing changes today. PIP continues under the current rules and assessments continue as normal. I really wished I could bring you some brain-blowing, amazing, wonderful good news about this. It's all cloak and daggers, speculation, and kind of like, waltzing us around the mulberry bush but not really doing anything. Maybe just, am I pessimistic? I don't know. Let me know what you think about this. I'm sorry guys, there's just sun everywhere. I'm trying to move backwards and forwards and dodge the light and dodge the sun, but I had to come and record this for you because I know this is so important to us all. Let's open up the discussion. I know this is going to be the first video of many about this, but overall I'm genuinely not impressed after all of that wait. What do you think?